When you think back to 313 Edict of Milan, you have this brand new religion, basically, and in my opinion, it's kind of the biggest PR campaign in the history of the world. You have churches needing to be built, you have theologians, you have leaders of the churches needing mass population to get on board with your religion and with your belief system. So they used architecture through the basilicas they started using. They used things that were comfortable to people, that were known to people, and yet made them different in a way where they could see the theology through it. So, for instance, in Roman basilicas, those were the courts, those were the town hall places people would go. So, architects in the early church were brilliant enough to use the exact same floor plan, put the church on a different axis of it, so it was a vertical axis instead of a horizontal. Well, still horizontal, I'm sorry, length axis. And then they changed the apse from where the judges used to sit and put the altar there and the priest there. So people would already be comfortable in that space, and without anyone saying anything, they would already know that the people who are standing there, that table there is the most important thing in this church, because they knew what it was. So they were really using art to educate people, to as theology changed, as people began to struggle with, is Christ all man? Is Christ all God? Is Christ both? That was shown in the art. So it really, you can, when you look at the art, you can see the history of theology struggling through it. And then when you get to the Renaissance, you have this change that's every factor. It's cultural, it's political, it's religious, where now there are people who have enough money to commission art themselves, and it's no longer all religious art or only monarchy art, but it's people who want art, and they don't all want religious art, so secular art comes into a play. And then you have the Holy Office of the Inquisition, you know, talking to Veronese and saying that what he did is not worthy to be called the Last Supper. And so you start having people judging art and making you change your art and your creativity based on what their assumptions of what the art should look like. I think it was more blatant then. I think it was still so new. I mean, if you take San Vitale and Ravenna and the mosaics of Justinian and Theodore bringing the Eucharistic elements in, I mean, that's my best example of politics and religion and art mixing together. I mean, that's pretty commercial. And yet it was accepted because that was the thing that was known then. No one fought back against it. But then with the Renaissance, I mean, you do have like the Medici family commissioning David by Donatello for their son Lorenzo's wedding, so that when people came to this and they saw his version of David, they would liken Lorenzo to this youthful warrior who had a huge kingship ahead of him. So that's pretty commercial of a religious subject. So I think people were more blatant about it then. I think people took a lot more license with it starting in the Renaissance, because mainly they had the money to do that now. It was not just the church commissioning its own art, but now you have these patrons, which is really the biggest part of the Renaissance coming into play. If you take the Brancacci Chapel, for example, and that shows the life of Peter, and Masaccio is a big contributor to that they chose Peter because that was the patron saint of their family, and they wanted their family to be raised a level by using that art. Now, Masaccio did a great thing with tribute money fresco and all these other paintings that it really did teach you about Peter himself. So it's a both and. The good artists could do that in a way that did not take away from the religious subject. There are definitely examples, though, where it is all about the donor or the family or the patronage instead of the religious subject. So one of them would be Titian. There's a Madonna and Child, I think it was the Pesaro family, commissioned this altarpiece. Well, it wasn't an altarpiece, I apologize, but it's Madonna and Child welcoming the Pesaro family back from this 1502, I think it was. The bishop at the time was part of the Pesaro family, and he had just had this great battle won in the Venetian-Turkish War. And so what Titian did was he has Madonna and Child welcoming back the bishop who has brought this Turkish, either a prisoner of war or someone he has converted to Christianity. You have St. Peter there welcoming him and introducing him into Mary. And then you have the Christ child on Mary's lap looking down, and you have, I believe it's St. Francis, welcoming the entire Pesaro family to the scene. So that's pretty much all about that family. And pretty much, I mean, it has a way that people in that time would see that and have civic pride because they won that battle. But at the same time, the majority of figures in that painting are part of that family and being elevated to meet Christ and Mary. We have not done a good job of going back to pre-Renaissance art because we think that maybe it's all bad now and we are putting too much judgment on it, and yet I think there's so much room for visual art. I'll just speak about visual art, to be back in churches. It doesn't have to be all Kenneth Wyatt disciples in the hallways, but we can use art, and people I think want art, and we just have to teach them how to use art in the faith setting to make it something that is helpful for their spiritual journey. For me, as an art historian, part of it for me is teaching them the history of it all to make it not scary. With education becomes obviously knowledge and power, and so once you realize this is the history of the art and this is why it's not iconoclasm or anything like that, then people began to, I think, open themselves to art in the church. And slowly doing it with what people are comfortable with, you know, bring in the art that maybe isn't my favorite but that people like and get them comfortable with that, and then move it to a next step, or talk to people. And if you find out that someone had a Catholic grandmother and she had this one icon in her house all the time in her living room, well then bring that into her Sunday school class and let her tell people why that's good and get them comfortable with that, and then slowly get things going. And also have people experience making art themselves, even if they're not artists. When we did the icon workshop, just that entire experience changed my view on icons totally, and now I surround myself with them in my office just because they're so comforting and keep me on the right path devotionally. So educating people about it, getting people hands-on experience with it, and having it be their idea rather than me telling them how awesome it is.